and traders. All of those defendants were housed safely in Alexandria pending their respective trials, and defendants' experience at the Alexandria Detention Center will presumably be no different. So you see the judge making the move to move Paul Manafort.
Us about his time in jail so far.
Well, that's right. This is what comes from a new filing.
Us about his time in jail so far.
Well, that's right. This is what comes from a new filing from Mueller's team, essentially saying, look, they can monitor Paul Manafort's calls while he's in jail. He apparently told one of his associates he feels like telephone. He also has a separate workspace. Now, the Mueller's team also points out that Paul Manafort also has access to a laptop. They gave him an extension cord so that he's able to use this laptop whether he's in his living unit, whether he's in his workspace. He's also able to send emails. Mueller's team says he's been sending more emails than he's allowed to thanks to a second computer with the help of his lawyers. They also point out that Paul Manafort doesn't even have to wear a prison jumpsuit while he's in jail. Now, Manafort's legal team did not take this too kindly today. They issued their own very sharply worded response. Might say he's getting better treatment than he actually is. Might sound more chipper than he actually is. Might say he's getting better treatment than he actually is. Might sound more chipper than he actually is. Manafort's attorneys also said that they're abiding by all the rules in this detention center when it comes to emails. They also took a swipe at the
analysis. Jeffrey Toobin, what's your reaction? Give us your latest, your reaction to this latest maneuver. The nature of this case.
Well, his lawyers are
the nature of this case.
Well, his lawyers are doing what good lawyers do. They are challenging the evidence in their case, and so far they've been unsuccessful, but the right thing to do. I mean, it is a very unusual situation to have the same defendant awaiting trial in two separate jurisdictions, one trial stacked up right behind the other. It is also true that it does seem that Paul Manafort is getting a hell of a lot better treatment in jail than most people awaiting trial do. So I expect this controversy to subside. I think it makes sense to put him in Alexandria, which is where the trial is going to be, and the focus in a couple of weeks when the trial start will turn to the evidence, and that's what the case is really about.
Gloria Borger, the special counsel, Robert Mueller, he went after what the prosecutors called Manafort's VIP lifestyle in solitary confinement. Is this another hardball tactic from Mueller?
Look, this ain't beanbag. And, as Jeffrey points out, this is going to go back and forth and back and forth. And I think, they were just pointing out that his living situation is not as terrible as you would think it is. And, what was interesting to me today was that at one point Manafort said, well, I want to be in this prison, which is further away. Then he changed his mind and said, and no, he wanted to be closer. Then he changed his mind and said, no, I really want to be further away. And they point out, well, actually, that prison, he's getting treated pretty well. And I think the judge was sort of frustrated by all of this.
Well, the attorneys overplayed their hand, right? I mean, as Jeffrey said, the legal issues in the case are more important than the conditions of confinement. But, it's like he gets sort of the, if you will, the presidential suite at the further away jail, and then they try and bargain for what? To get closer, to get released back to house arrest. And the judge, clearly, and Mueller, as you say, Gloria, had enough.
Well, and to be closer to his attorneys, right? Which makes some sense, but then he changed his mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't like to use legalese too much, but it is worth remembering that being in jail sucks. It is terrible to be in jail. And Paul Manafort is having a bad time. That is not surprising, but that is true of virtually everyone who is in jail. That's why they call it jail.
But you believe his security, his safety would be endangered if he's moved to this jail in Alexandria, Virginia, outside of Washington?
That seems so preposterous to me. As Judge Ellis pointed out, I mean, this is where Zacarias Moussaoui was tried. They have had all sorts of terrorist trials there, all sorts of, very high-profile, very serious cases where people are looking at, very lengthy. His safety is not an issue as far as I can tell.
Rebecca Berg, let's turn to the developments in the confirmation fight for the president's nominee for the Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh. The Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, is now asking prosecutors all over the country to help review what they describe as documents related to Judge Kavanaugh. This looks, to some at least, like they're mixing politics with all of this. What's your analysis?
Right. Well, it looks that way, Wolf, because this isn't usually how it's done. It's a break with what we've seen with past Supreme Court nominees. But the explanation from the Department of Justice to some of our colleagues here at CNN is that this is a very different nomination in terms of the document requests they are getting and just the massive scope of documents that are responsive to those requests. Brett Kavanaugh, of course, worked in the George W. Bush White House. They had email in that White House. So and then that there could be 1 million documents concerning Brett Kavanaugh
So David,
that are
you think there are
responsive to
some,
that request.
the White House has reason to be concerned then when they go back and review this entire record?
To use the word that Kavanaugh himself used in that Minnesota Law Review article, if he has done something dastardly or even illegal that is turned up in these emails or any of these records, maybe. Short of that, if there's just something controversial or there's a legal opinion that we're not already aware of, no, I don't think there's any trouble. I think Republicans are going to vote for him, and he will be
But
confirmed.
what this could do is drag it out, and I think that's what Democrats want to do. When you have to go through at least 1 million documents, it takes time. And they're going to FOIA more documents. And they're going to, so I think that if the Democrats want to sort of stretch out this and start the hearings later and potentially not have him on the bench if he were to get approved by October, deal for them.
Jeffrey, how unusual, if it is unusual, is all of this?
Well, it is unusual. When I was an assistant U.S. attorney and I was a criminal prosecutor, the idea that maybe justice would ask you to do something like this would strike a lot of people as bizarre. It's your job as a prosecutor to fight crime, not to review, political documents. You can see the circumstances here might justify it. What the staff secretary does is process all the documents that go to the President of the United States. So it is a document-heavy job. It doesn't surprise me that there might be 1 million documents. If this is only a couple of weeks, I don't think fighting drugs and white-collar crime to go what is largely a political task.
Rebecca, is there any realistic chance the confirmation won't be achieved?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there are a number of things you could run into along the way. If there is something that comes out in these documents that is damaging, there could be some response that Kavanaugh gives during the confirmation hearing. Is that likely? Maybe not, because Republicans have the votes. There could be some Democrats who cross over to support Kavanaugh, as well as they did with Gorsuch just a year ago. So the odds are in his favor, but anything can happen.
Is that the Republicans keep Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, it's over. Well,
right. But don't forget, we're also heading into a period in the Mueller investigation where there's a if he decides that he doesn't want to do it voluntarily, if they don't work out some kind of a deal. And that's another issue here that Kavanaugh is going to have to face with Democrats, because of course he's written about it so extensively because he worked for Ken Starr, and when he worked for Ken Starr he thought it was president to testify, but then he had kind of a conversion afterwards and now thinks it's too much of a bother. So the question is, how are Democrats going to handle that, and how will Kavanaugh handle that?
Ken Starr, the Whitewater investigator, spent a lot of time investigating Bill Clinton when he was president of the United States.
And he did the Vince Foster investigation.
Yes, he did. I remember that very, very vividly. All right, guys, stand. Who are finally with their children. Once again, one mother says her son, though, didn't recognize her. And does President Trump think his harsh criticisms, though, are angrily disputing that? Let's go straight to CNN's Ed Lavendera. He's in Texas near the southern border. Ed, you've been seeing some of the family reunions, and you've also been hearing some heartbreaking stories.
Yeah, emotional day of a few of the stories that we've been able to gather of these families that have been reunited. The last number we've had is Mandated to have reunited by yesterday, almost 24 hours ago. And what's even more remarkable, Wolf, today is that despite our efforts to ask about how many more reunions have taken place, we've received some of the few who have been reunited with their children in El Paso, Texas. Some of the few who have been reunited with their children in El Paso, Texas. Pablo Ortiz says he was separated from his 3-year-old son on April 30th and says he was only able to speak with him. I wanted to take my child. How am I going to leave him? He's little. This man, who only wanted to be identified as Roger, says his son was taken away from him in February.
Me agarraron del hombro y me agarraron así.
They took me by the arm, he says. They took me by my shoulder and took me to a small room. I saw when they took. He says his son has asked
2% model that I think is due in 2024, of 2% spending of your own gross domestic product on your own defense. Putin's summit.